This is TWiT.
The idea here that, I think sort of historically, specifically, and in terms of, like you said, policy, but when we are looking now at the inequality that takes place, we almost have this divide, this belief that if we throw technology at something, then suddenly it becomes this pure, unbiased thing. But as you talk about in the book, and I think as at least some data scientists talk about, these systems that we're putting in place are built by humans who do have these inherent biases. And so we can't just sort of, it seems, excuse the fact that at times these systems are going to have these biases, right?
Absolutely. And so that's really what attracted me to this line of research, is that the more that people think of a field or a way of producing knowledge as entirely objective and asocial and apolitical, that imbues in that form of knowledge production and authority and a way of arbitrating reality and making decisions that people stop questioning because we assume that it's objective and neutral. And for that very reason, I think we need to be very rigorous and consistent in terms of keeping our eye on and questioning the way that emotions, values, biases, past patterns of human decision-making get encoded into these new systems, but then become black boxed and people stop questioning them because we assume that it's neutral and objective. And so we need to open that box up and understand what are the historic patterns, what are the biases and assumptions that are being, in the inputs of these automated systems that then are often reproducing inequality in the world. And so that's precisely what motivates me. And this is not something that's novel about emerging technologies. Right. Science and technology has historically had this air and allure of objectivity that people assume it rises above human concerns and human patterns of behavior. And so it's building on this tradition in many ways. And I think the stakes are a bit higher now because of the way that it's impacting so many more people in so many more areas of our lives. And so I'm hoping that we can learn from our history and in order to really rethink these systems that we're building.
Yeah, I love the anecdote that you start with at the beginning, sort of talking about growing up in a community where you could hear the helicopters, the police patrolling via helicopter and in other ways. And it's sort of, it's rattling the windows or it's rattling the door. And so it's a very front or you confronted the fact that was going on.
Yeah.
You were aware of it and the community felt watched. And in many ways, I think for some people at least, there is this idea that without that front-facing reminder, they may not feel as if they're watched. But some of us know that has not changed, that there's still that there. But I really think that is a chilling and also important point, that we go from a place where it's visceral now to this sort of, it's outside of our minds. And like you said, we give the benefit of the doubt to to science and to technology, as if suddenly things are going to be, like you said, objective and asocial.
Exactly.
But it's still there.
So there are some things that are definitely consistent with our past, the way that we, for example, often hone technological advancements on the backs of the most vulnerable. So many breakthroughs have benefited from oppressive systems, whether it's experimentation on enslaved women to better gynecology, whether it's the Tuskegee syphilis experiment to hone treatments for syphilis, whether it's experiments on prisoners to hone various kind of dermatological techniques, and up till recently last week, where Google was found trying to coercively take face scans from homeless and homeless people and students in Atlanta. the vulnerable populations have often been the substrate, have been the test ground for scientific and technological advancements. So there's continuity there, but as you mentioned, there's also discontinuities, ways that our current system are perpetuating forms of discrimination and inequality, but in a much more subtler way. And so it's, like you said, not in our faces. And this is more of a reason for us to study it and to debate it and to put it into the realm of democratic decision making, rather than let people make decisions behind closed doors in private industries, all the while affecting everybody. But nobody voted on these people to make decisions about technologies that are impacting all of our lives. And this subtle way in which, for example, surveillance systems are being rolled out throughout the world, really, not even just the United States, is more of a reason for us to take it seriously and to look at it, because it's you can't point anymore, simply to a racist cop or a racist judge or a racist doctor. They're automated systems that are perpetuating that racism of the past, but the agents behind that are harder to hold accountable.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of surveillance systems, we've got the Ring video doorbell and everything that Ring is involved with, where they've partnered with police forces. And that has been an ongoing topic. Frankly, in some of the shows that I do regularly, we've talked time and time again about Ring and what's going on there. We have it's this. It almost feels sometimes like the technology moves so fast, and we've become. Let me try to compare it to something like medicines, where a medicine has to go through all these different processes and has to be tested in all these different ways and has to pass all these regulations before it can actually be brought onto the market and folks can use it and benefit from it or not benefit from it. But the technological industry, where we have, a doorbell that people are just slapping on their doors left and right, and then suddenly Ring is making these decisions behind closed doors without any input. It's kind of frightening how that's allowed to happen.
Yeah, and I like that analogy of thinking about it parallel to other regulatory systems where we try to create safeguards so that we don't put things on the market that can harm different individuals and groups. And so when we think about the speed of the advancements and the innovation is one part, but also the values animating it. So even within the medical industry, you have those safeguards, but if the driving imperative within that industry is to make profit rather than to heal people or to treat people, there are still all kinds of ways in which harms get perpetuated, whether it's through the pricing of drugs, whether it's through our insurance industry that allows, some people have access to medicines. And so we need to think about the pace of tech design, but also what are the animating values? Does profit trump the public good? And so there's a lot of these variables that I think, like you said, we've taken for granted that it's going to benefit. And when it comes to, say, like Ring or other surveillance technologies, one of the dominant things that I hear people say, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, you shouldn't mind, right?
Boy.
If you don't have anything to hide, then what's the issue? And only people who are sitting in a position of privilege and obliviousness, really, to the way that our current policing systems target people, regardless of what they actually do, would say something like that. People who have never been accused of something or been suspected of something, regardless of their actual actions. And so, again, thinking about what is the mindset and the worldview that animates these systems is this idea that criminality and innocence is some objective, pure divide, rather than a production of those who create and enforce the law, who then position some people as inherently criminal and some as inherently innocent. And then we need to think about how this history of criminalizing racialized populations in particular are left out of the conversation of tech design and surveillance systems when they should be front and center.
Folks, if you're listening and not watching, then you didn't see me giving so many snaps to that, because absolutely, I agree with so many of those points. And in fact, I can remember before I had my sort of come to Jesus moment, as it were, about privacy and security, where I fell into that camp of like, well, if there's, I have nothing to hide, so I'm not worried. No, when we think of things that way, not only are we doing ourselves a disservice, but we are doing everyone who needs these protections in place a disservice.
Absolutely.
And for us to have apathy, I think, about these things and I feel like it's a bit insidious. I feel like some of these companies sort of count on that apathy, that we don't read the terms of service, that we, are fine with putting this technology in place and don't care about it. I mean, I can go up to a friend and say, that television that you have, it costs $100 less because there's a system, there's a piece of software on there that can watch what you're watching on the TV that they then sell to an advertising agency to supplement the cost. And then that friend would be like, oh, well, that's fine. It doesn't. And we do that too much. The joining, I think, of ignorance, and I don't mean ignorance in the negative sense, but ignorance just in the not knowing sense, is joined with that apathy, and you get this just like, take all of these things away from me, or I don't necessarily care about that. And that's where it gets dangerous.
It's our apathy, but it's also the indifference of the people producing the technologies. Also, sometimes people respond to my work and say, well, I don't really think these these tech designers are racist, or they're trying to harm people. And I would agree. I mean, we can't prove that one way or another. And it's actually besides the point, because it's not necessarily individual malice or intention to harm, but it's an indifference to the social dimensions of one's work and one's inventions, and the fact that the things that you produce are likely to be used and implemented in ways that harm particular groups, and sort of taking that on board early on in the design process rather than waiting for some controversy to break out where your ignorance is on display, as was clear with the Google example. And so I think we need to think and talk more about the danger and the harm of indifference on the part of the organizations and companies that are producing technologies, indifference to the social, and also a kind of naivety about the social, so the hope to diversify facial recognition technologies, for example, is just one, just because it's on my mind from this Google homeless story, where this coercive process is wrapped in the language of, we're trying to make the technology better at being able to detect darker skinned individuals. And so that is the attempt to create an inclusive product through a coercive process on the backs of vulnerable people, also ignoring the fact that the very technology that you're honing is likely to be used to target these very same people in ways that are harmful, either through policing or other institutional mechanisms that look at particular populations as sources of danger and menace. And so we have to take that larger context into consideration rather than just giving lip service to inclusion. We're trying to make this technology more diverse and inclusive as these buzzwords that mean nothing in the reality that we live in today.